Hello, listeners. I am thrilled to have Amy Creaven from Trust Your Dog on the show today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excited to have you. So for those of you that don't know Amy is a local trainer. So we're both in Colorado, which is fun. And she's a recovering ICU nurse and has been a Pryor Academy certified training partner since 2010. Prior to COVID, I love how that's like a thing. Like life before COVID, she worked with all types of canine behavioral cases privately. Currently, she is a work from home mother of 2 non-fur children and one amazing furry sidekick, the marvelous Miss Moya. I love that you put that in. I love that show, by the way, as well as a multitude of chickens. Amy also teaches positive reinforcement rattlesnake avoidance workshops, which is super cool, and a fear-free handling and cooperative care lab to the vet students at CSU, which I didn't know about that. That's amazing.
Yeah, this is actually the first semester that we're doing the cooperative care lab. In the fall teach the fear-free curriculum from Sophia Yin. And they all go through the fear-free curriculum, and then we do a lab down at the shelter and we practice and they get their mechanical skills down. And this is the first year that they're letting me introduce them to cooperative care.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So Moya is going to come in and she's got some cooperative care behaviors, and the students are going to learn how to listen to an owner and the dog and work through consent and learn all of that awesome stuff.
That's so cool. I love that. CSU is so progressive in that way, where it's really trying to bring a lot of behavior into their program, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're doing a lot of good work with that.
Yes, with Dr. Pockle. I know he comes out and does a 20-hour course. Yep. I'm always like, can I just peer through the window while you're doing that? Can I do that? No. But this is actually the part of the bio that I'm very interested in. Okay. Is in her free time, she takes care of her mental health, which I love, by taking forest baths. Please explain to me what a forest bath is.
It's a hike. Yeah, you go and bathe in the forest. It's
like a type of bath. That's so funny. I am moving forward, never calling a hike, and we'll only be calling it a forest bath. I love that.
What's a hike? You're just like looking at the trees and the environment and feeling the wind. And it's so much more like a bath than it is like get to the summit of the mountain.
Yes.
Right.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, and I get very agenda driven, right? So I love the idea of even reframing it for me to like we're bathing.
Yeah.
Take our time.
Self-care. We're gonna do it.
I love it. Okay, so forest baths, playing ice hockey, which I think is amazing, and agility with Moya.
Yep.
So welcome to the show again. Thank you for being here. And we're going to talk about the sexiest of all topics.
I think so.
Yeah, I know you do. Which are muzzles. So Amy is also the creator of some amazing muzzles. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, because muzzles are necessary in a lot of cases, right? So before we get started, I'm really curious to know how you got involved in making muzzles.
Yeah.
Did you have like a moment one morning and you were like, this is what I'm doing?
Well, it wasn't necessarily a moment. I think as a trainer, I wanted to create some muzzle content and, with some really pretty muzzles. And so I made one for Moya and it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. I think it took me like 5 to 6 hours to make, and it was all this wonky, like it didn't look like a muzzle, didn't fit. But I kept working at it, and then some of my friends found out about it, and I also started doing that because my clients were having a hard time getting into it. I was having a really hard time converting them into wearing muzzles when we needed them to progress our training safely. And so I wanted to bring that to them. And so as I started making them for my clients, and things, I got to try all things out and, see what worked and what didn't. And then COVID hit and I couldn't leave my children at home
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't have childcare. So, yeah, so I stopped dog training at that point for the most part. Still doing the rattlesnake avoidance workshops, but stopped working with private clients at that point. And the muzzles really took off. I think it was something about everybody staying at home and being on social media a lot. And then, you know, realizing I've got to walk this dog
Mm-hmm.
and it's not going so well. So
Yeah, yeah. And
yeah.
so we need a muzzle. And what's cool about your muzzles, which I mean, this is happening in sort of like the muzzle industry, if you will, but
Hmm.
you're making them so inviting. They're not these like Hannibal Lecter scary things anymore. Like they are
Yeah.
really fun and a lot of colors and right. Would you agree?
Yep. I agree. I mean, the history of muzzles, they were really popular in the late 1800s, early 1900s, with the rabies.
Mm-hmm.
It was required in large cities that dogs wear muzzles, and there were articles in women's journals on how to crochet your own muzzle.
Oh,
So,
wow.
like, that was like, you know, back in the origination of muzzles. And then, you know, and I think that we just have this awful stigma with muzzles because we think that we're going to end up censoring our dogs and
Mm-hmm.
that they automatically look so scary, and the only reason to wear a muzzle is because they bite. And it's just hard to get past that initial fear. And the color really helps bring out the curiosity in people
Mm-hmm.
and the excitement and get them asking questions versus bringing their own feelings and thoughts to something that is so stigmatized already.
Yeah, totally. So speaking of the many ways, the many reasons why we would get a dog used to wearing a muzzle, like back when you were seeing clients or even as folks are
Hmm.
placing orders, like what are the common reasons people are wanting, maybe not
Yeah.
wanting, but are leaning into purchasing a muzzle to, they're like leaning into that process and reframing
Oh, I
it
think
for
I lost you.
themselves. Oh, can you hear me? You're frozen.
Oh no.
Oh, it's me.
There we go.
That was me. That never happens. I
You
was like, oh,
okay?
it's got to be your internet because it like never is my internet and it was mine. I'm so sorry.
Oh geez.
Okay, so I will start off where I was like,
Yeah, we were leaning into
yeah.
why
Mhm.
people are
Yeah.
asking for muzzles.
Yeah. So speaking of your clients in your private practice and your customers that are calling you to purchase one, like what are the common concerns that you hear from them that are causing them to get a muzzle? Like what are the reasons for that?
Yeah, I think the first and largest reason that people are looking for muzzles is bite prevention.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether it's, you know, I want to progress training. And so we're going to start doing closer proximity stuff. And I just want this thing on so that there's a barrier between my dog's mouth and this child that we're working with,
Mm-hmm.
or other dog that we're working with, or guest, family member, or whatever. Um, and then a lot of people do the same sort of thing for like hikes and walks because you can't control the
All the
environment
things.
all the
Yeah.
time, all the things, all the kids that are running up to your dog, or people that reach down to pet your dog as they walk past, or off leash dogs, you know, all of those reasons. Not muzzles not only put a barrier up between your dog's mouth and the oncoming person or dog, but it also gives a very clear nonverbal signal, hey,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you shouldn't touch this dog,
Yeah.
you know. And it gets people at least asking questions before they reach.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, do your customers, do they follow up and tell you that like, wow, like the social behavior of the other people that I'm encountering has totally changed
Yeah.
and like we have more space now?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they also get a lot of feedback with the colors and the rhinestones that you can add onto these muzzles too, that people
Mhm.
compliment them more than they make comments like, oh, what a shame, or that poor dog, or, that type of thing that you get with other off the shelf brands.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
So they're hearing, like, are they hearing like, wow, that's a really cute muzzle? Or are they hearing like, nice job muzzling your dog and being able to give them space?
Yeah. And I think that
Both.
that's starting. Yeah, both. I think it's
Mhm.
also becoming more common as muzzle awareness is starting to happen in the general public too.
Yeah. That's so
Mhm.
cool. That makes me so happy for these people, because sometimes, like, when I'm talking to a lot of my clients, a lot of what I do is reactivity, and um just to be like helping clients
Yeah.
find their voice. Like sometimes it's really
Mhm.
hard for them because of whatever their learning history is with asking for what they need and all of those things. And so, like, that's what I love about like the muzzle, or like gear that you could wear, or gear on the leash, or gear on the dog, right? Like you don't have to come up with like the short, concise thing to say, especially if it's hard for you. You just wear it.
Yeah.
And I love that that's happening with the muzzle. I mean, it's obvious that it would be happening, but it's great to
Yeah.
hear that it truly is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really exciting. But yeah, in addition to that, I get a lot of people with dogs with pica, dogs that eat rocks and sticks,
Mhm.
or too much goose poop. Yeah.
And so they're desensitizing them to the muzzle, and then they are putting the muzzle on in those problematic areas, correct?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I have one client, I've had her for like 5 years now, and she's awesome. And her dog, the initial reason she wanted a muzzle is because her dog compulsively eats goose poop and grass to the point where she makes herself sick.
Makes it
And
just, yeah.
they weren't able to enjoy their walks because she would just lay down and just eat and eat and eat, and she couldn't redirect her, and she couldn't get this dog to move. And now that she's wearing a muzzle, not only does she not worry about other dogs off leash running up to her, because that was
Mhm.
an issue too, but the dog is actually sniffing and exploring and looking at the world around her because she can no longer get to her compulsive eating behavior.
Yeah, and wow, that is a perfect example of how, when you think about, or like the limited ideas that, okay, we put a muzzle on this dog, and then now you sort of alluded to it earlier. It's like, oh, that poor dog. It's like,
Mhm.
wait, that dog without the muzzle was engaging in compulsive like behaviors that were not healthy for the dog. And now I hear you saying that with the muzzle on, she's engaging in species typical behavior that is sniffing and investigating her environment. Like, to me, the muzzle is the gift in that situation, which is so
Absolutely.
great.
Yeah. And that's the muzzle that made the rest of her world accessible,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah, such a great reframe. And then I also imagine like clients are coming to you with a muzzle. Like I have Sully desensitized to a muzzle for vet visits, like for just in case, right? Like
Yeah.
just in case scenario. So do you
Hmm.
have folks doing that, or or is it usually like, we're in a tricky situation and now I need a muzzle?
I think I see that more with trainers that are more
Hmm.
aware of like muzzles and their benefits in a bind,
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm.
And I think a lot of trainers even overlook the benefits of a muzzle when you have a dog that has had surgery and they're post-op
Yep.
and they're walking around the house with a cone. And a lot of people can, if they've desensitized their dog to the muzzle, they can limit licking by using a muzzle.
Hmm.
And now the dog's not banging into the chair or the back of your legs, and they're not scaring themselves every time they move that big old lampshade.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
so difficult. I love that.
it is.
So there was a post on social the other day about fitting for muzzles,
Mhm.
and I was like, oh, I want to make sure that that's in our conversation, and it was. I was like, great job, Marissa. But when fitting for a muzzle, gosh, there's a lot of considerations, right? In terms of like, you want to make sure that this is appropriate. And for listeners that don't know what types of muzzles we're talking about, like, you're not making cloth muzzles,
No, I'm not
right?
making cloth
You're not
muzzles.
crocheting muzzles like you mentioned earlier. I had a moment like, how is that a thing?
I
Okay.
know. I don't know how effective it would have been, but
Yes. Like, okay. But we're talking about basket, right? And so,
Yes.
so what are some of the considerations that you ask clients to think about or to measure or whatnot when you are fitting them for a muzzle?
Yeah. So when we're talking about a well-fit muzzle, I'm generally thinking of a muzzle that's going to be on the dog longer than 5 minutes. When I'm working with the vet students and they're talking about occlusion muzzles, which is what they commonly use in vet clinics, the cloth muzzles,
Mm-hmm.
I tell them you can't leave that muzzle on longer than your hands are on the dog. If you're going to take your hands off the dog, the muzzle has to come off too.
Yep. I love that rule.
Yeah. So basket muzzles should allow the dog to pant fully
Mm-hmm.
and not rub on their eyes or their nose or really anywhere else. But some dogs are more sensitive than others, and there are a lot of modifications that you can do to get that. But the big things that I'm asking people to measure are their dog when they're panting. So can you get a tape measure around your dog with their mouth panting, which is next to impossible to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just no, dogs don't like to pant with somebody touching their face.
Totally. Yeah.
So a trick that you can do is put a toy that will mimic the pant size in their mouth and then measure that.
Oh, that's a good.
Or ask them to hold a ball or something. But a lot of dogs are more comfortable having like a ruler held up next to their face while they're panting. And then if you snap a photo of that, we can actually measure the height of the dog's pants. And I've developed a chart over the last couple of years that has the correlating circumference with the pant height, so that we can put the two of them together. So if you can get one of those or the other, I can figure out the other one. And then the other big one
she does math as well.
I do math.
You need to put that in your bio. She does math. Just kidding.
Math and science. Yeah, it's not as easy as you think it is. Yeah, and then the other measurement is nose length. So from where you want the muzzle to rest on your dog's face, which is usually about a half an inch in front of their eyes, unless it's like, I don't know, a French bulldog, and they only have a half an inch of a nose.
I'm thinking of all those breeds.
Yeah. And I need to know about those too, because they have funny shaped faces. So when I'm making muzzles for those, or when you're looking for muzzles for those breeds, you need to look for a different profile muzzle, something that's shorter. Sometimes you need them to be longer underneath so that their jowls can fit in, or their underbite. And then, yeah, I know. And then we have the custom, like, the egg heads, the bull terriers have that big slope too. We need to know about that.
Got it.
But those are the two big measurements. Everything else that I ask for, I have 10 measurements that I ask for, but everything else is adjustable once you get the muzzle hole.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So those are the common things that you're asking clients to measure.
Yep. Those are the ones that you can't fix when you get it home. And if you do need it adjusted, it needs to probably come back and I'll adjust it after the fact. So, yep.
And I mean, I'm thinking about, what makes a good muzzle versus what makes a poor muzzle. And obviously a poor muzzle would be if it doesn't fit properly, or if your dog can't pant, or if you're using a cloth muzzle for longer periods of time. Like, I so appreciate that that's the rule, right? Like if you're touching the dog, it's on. If you're stopping, then it's off. What makes a really good muzzle?
I think it depends. It depends on what you're going to use it for. So, I mean, if you're going to use it for eating rocks that are the size of your fist, then, a Biothane basket muzzle would be fine, along with anything else that's not going to fit in that muzzle. But I think if you're looking for a muzzle that's going to stop your Rottweiler from ripping somebody's arm off, hopefully that doesn't happen, but then you're going to need something that's a little bit more secure, either a wire metal muzzle, or I have the vinyl bite-proof muzzle option as well, because they don't flex like the Biothane does.
Got it. Right. That's right. So one option that you have, which is like the beautiful bright colors, is the Biothane. So that's going to be more malleable. And then the other ones that you have, it's like more durable.
Yeah, it's a thick, hard vinyl that's bent and secured into place. And then it's got biothane trimmings, I guess would be the word, so that you can still add the color. And then it's a clear see-through vinyl, so you can see the dog's face a little bit better in the vinyl muzzle, but it's definitely a lot more durable. And
yeah, that makes total sense. And speaking of that, like I'm thinking about, let's say we have a dog that has done damage to other dogs, and I think it's important for us to mention that, like, even though your dog's wearing a muzzle, your dog can still do damage.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So just as like safety precautions, not that we're just going to slap a muzzle on your dog and then you can go out and like engage with the world and social, quote unquote, socialize your dog and expose them to things that, flood your dog and expose them to things. They can still do damage wearing a muzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there are a few muzzles out there that, and even the muzzles that are bite proof, I mean, honestly, like, take that all with a grain of salt, because there are situations that will occur that the muzzle will fall off, or you get rushed by an off-leash dog and the off-leash dog takes the muzzle off of your dog, and that's when bites happen. Like, even if those muzzles are bite proof, there's always some degree of failure that you should take into account.
Yeah. And it's like what we say about anything, right? It's like, it is a management tool. Absolutely. And prevention tool, and management always fails, right? It's not sort of like if, but when.
Yep.
Yeah. So we've got, you love muzzles and cooperative care.
Yep.
So, and forest baths. But what's your favorite technique when introducing a muzzle to a dog? I would imagine it is a very cooperative process. So I'd love to hear what your favorite protocols or processes that you use.
Yeah. So I actually like to take a hands-off approach first, in that I want the dog to associate this muzzle with lots and lots of good things. Also assuming that the dog isn't like one of those weird resource guarders that guards things from across the room that are not in their present. Like, contact a trainer.
Yes, if your dog starts guarding your muzzle because you've been smearing it with peanut butter or something like that. Yes.
Yeah, maybe it's time to call somebody. But yeah, so I like to take a piece of cardboard and cut a muzzle size hole in it, and then stick that in their food bowl and dump their food in it, so that they're literally eating out of a muzzle bowl and not a food bowl. And it makes it a lot easier and more approachable for clients, I think, to get the muzzle training started, because so often as trainers, we're like, okay, we're going to click and treat for this, and we're going to do this approximation, and then we're increase the rate of reinforcement and this criteria, and it goes right over.
I'm so thinking of a client right now that we did muzzle training, and he tried so hard. And man, was I lumping it for him. Like I wish I had broken it down. Like I'm in seeing the training session in my head going like, oh, Marissa.
Right.
Yeah.
We all do it.
Start with what you were just saying, like feeding out of the muzzle, but I don't know if we did it enough before we started actually like shaping the dog for putting his nose into the muzzle. Right. So yes. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that step really primes the dog so that the owner can have some success when we start asking the dog to put their nose in on their own and operantly train that. On top of that, though, like while they're doing this feeding protocol, I have the owners start teaching nose targeting, and not just to the hand. So can you target this cup? Can you target my glasses? Can you target this pencil? Or, lots of different things. And then I introduce like a yogurt cup, so that they're putting their nose into a yogurt cup. They don't even need a muzzle to do that. I mean, they could even feed the dog out of a yogurt cup to start with, and then they're starting to target the inside of a yogurt cup, and it transitions really easily over to now we're targeting the inside of a muzzle.
I
And
love
so,
that.
yeah. And so when you're targeting the inside of the muzzle, I click and treat for the dog's nose going in, and then I feed out. And then I slowly start to feed inside the muzzle as the dog gains confidence with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then
You're
we start,
feeding
yeah.
in, I'm sorry to interrupt. You're
Mhm.
feeding in to reinforce the position, like to pay for the position, correct? But you're also reinforcing out so they don't feel baited into
Yeah.
only
So,
getting reinforcement in the muzzle, correct?
yeah. So when I first start introducing the muzzle, I actually feed out. So nose goes in the muzzle and
Mm-hmm.
they eat out, and nose goes in the muzzle and they eat out. And then we start developing the nose goes in the muzzle, we feed in.
Got it.
And then
Mm-hmm.
so then we can start working on some duration. And then once we have some duration, I start adding movement where I'll hold the muzzle in front of me, the dog's nose goes in, I click and treat inside, feed inside, and then take a step backwards. So the dog has to take a step to keep their nose inside the muzzle. So
Mm-hmm.
the dog is totally in control of keeping their face inside the muzzle at this point. And we start clicking and treating for taking steps while staying in the muzzle. Does
It's
that make
awesome.
sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's almost like you're holding the muzzle and the dog's nose is in the muzzle. So they're as you're moving back, they have to follow you and keep their nose
Exactly.
in. Got it.
Yep,
So
exactly.
you're incorporating like it's almost without strapping it on. It's almost like walking while wearing a muzzle
hmm
before you even strap it on and then start walking.
Yep,
Correct?
exactly. Yep.
Love
And
it.
then, and then, I mean, you can start working on this separately too. When I was working with Moya, she doesn't like having anything put on her. And
Mm-hmm.
so we've done a lot of work with that. And with the cooperative care stuff that we've done a lot of chin rests and messing with her ears and touching her head. And so that's stuff that you can work on in addition to this step, but
Mm-hmm.
it helps a lot when then you start adding the clip of the muzzle on. So their
Yeah.
nose goes in, you have the duration. I'm going to mess with your head a little bit. And the dog's like, yeah, you do that all the time. And now it's just in the context of the muzzle.
Yeah, I love that because that is usually, I find that it gets a little, you need almost like another set of hands, right? To like
Yeah.
hold the muzzle and clip it. Like that whole thing gets a little wonky.
Yeah. Cause then the dog's like, crap, this thing's still on my head. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's supposed to come off, or I'm supposed to have control about getting it off. And then we
Mm-hmm.
just do short periods of time, take it off, and then start feeding as we're moving. And
Mm-hmm.
then the just by default of feeding while moving, the duration of wearing that muzzle starts to lengthen.
Yeah. And when you're feeding while you're moving, are you using something like in terms of reinforcement, are you using something that you can like squeeze cheese or like something that you can that the dog can lick versus trying to this is where I feel like my handling
Yeah.
is poor, where I'm like strategically trying to give them a treat and then
hmm
they're trying to get it and it's this really cumbersome engagement
hmm
that we have.
Well, that's why I like all of these steps leading up to this point, because if you're feeding through the muzzle, you are learning the mechanics of how to get a treat into the muzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And the dog is also learning the mechanics of how to get a
Of
treat
receiving
through the
it.
muzzle. Yeah. And I think that that's huge, especially with those dogs that get frantic around food. You're like, just let me get the food in the muzzle. And
Yeah.
they're like
Mm-hmm.
banging the muzzle around all over the place. And you're like, if you just hold still for a second, I can get it in.
Mm-hmm.
And it teaches them kind of a wait moment. But yes, sometimes I do suggest using like a food tube so that they can lick through the muzzle, and it kind of helps soothe them as well.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if you've got that super guardy dog and there's peanut butter stuff left over in the muzzle, just be
Yeah.
aware that that might be an item to guard. I don't think it's super common, with that one exception that I think we saw Michael Shikashio show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was like, really? Oh my God, that's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what else? Yeah. And then once the muzzle's clipped on, then pairing the muzzle with really fun activities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I
And
love
there are
it.
there's so many activities that dogs can do while wearing muzzles, you know,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's playing with a friend or I've had clients send me videos of they play bop the ball. So instead of playing like catch, where they throw the ball to the dog and the dog catches it midair, they throw the ball to the dog and the dog just bops the ball back. And it's like this
Oh,
back and forth. It's really
mhm.
cute.
That's really cute. I love that. Um, what are some of the challenges that take place during the training process? I mean, I know that we alluded to some. I would imagine the one that I talked about, which was my own training client, was I think we were just moving too fast, right? Which is like the bane of all of our existence, right? Is that like if all else fails, you're probably just moving too fast.
Right? Slow is fast, fast
Slow
is
is fast.
slow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what are
Yeah.
some of the challenges that you see?
I think the biggest challenge is honestly that collar snap. Once you get that
Mhm.
collar on, and then I think there's also a little bit of like fear that people have when their dog they put the muzzle on and the dog's walking around and the dog realizes, hey, this thing isn't coming off, and they start to paw at it a little bit.
Mhm.
I don't want them tearing at their face, obviously, but I think there's some of this like, oh, there's this thing on my head. What is this about? And they're trying to figure it out a little bit, kind of like, the first day you wear a baseball hat or,
Mhm.
a pair of sunglasses, and you're like, what the heck is this? Let me just adjust this a little bit differently. And then once I figure it out, especially if you continue with the reinforcement and short breaks, they tend to figure it out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, are you waiting for the dog to recover, right? Like the dog, you finally snapped it. They're like, oh, what's on my head? This is kind of weird. Are you sort of like, okay, well, what choices do you make if I'm like engaging with you, like if I'm trying to play or walking around the yard or something
Mhm.
like that? Like, do you eventually accept or receive that you're wearing this thing? Oh, you don't? Then we actually need to do more work. Like, is that how you're gauging it?
I think, I mean, with any training, there's some
Mhm.
exploratory sessions, right? You're like, okay, where are we now? Where's our
Mhm.
threshold? I don't want to leave the dog in this panic mode where they have
Mhm.
to recover on their own. Um, if they're really struggling, I want to help them out by all means. But if there's like a moment of like, oh, they're going to rub their muzzle on the grass. Okay. Do they get
Mhm.
up and walk away? Do they recover from that?
Yeah.
And if they don't, then yeah, we need to work a little bit more on the muzzle conditioning.
Yeah. Awesome. Um, and when, you know, as we were alluding to earlier, when people are either purchasing for you or when you're having those conversations with your clients, when you saw private
Mhm.
clients, I imagine like I've had some clients go like, "Oh no, like we're not I don't think we need to wear a muzzle." And I was like, "Okay, well here are the safety concerns, here are the risk considerations, here's why I'm bringing it up, right? Like what are your
Mhm.
thoughts?" Right? And sometimes I find that I'm like planting the seed and then we might circle back around to it at some other point. Um, what are some of the conversations or like tips that you've used when you're talking to a client to try to reframe this as like what I had said earlier, like this is the sexy thing, right? Like getting your dog used to a muzzle, right? So what are some of the conversations you've had with clients in that capacity?
Yeah, so I usually don't walk in and tell clients, "Oh, you need to muzzle that dog." Just like you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, like
Mm-hmm.
it is planting that seed and it is starting the conversation and letting the clients be curious and ask questions and set their own goals,
Mm-hmm.
because I think a lot of clients don't see the benefit of a muzzle initially until you're like, okay, well, now we're on, week 4 and you can walk, 40 feet away from a dog. And I'd like to do some setups where we get a little bit closer. But if we get closer and you're doing that exploratory session and things go south, you want to have that extra barrier there.
Mm-hmm.
And so explaining it to them like that, and then also making it about the client's feelings as well.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel when you're walking your dog? Are you constantly searching the environment, panic that there's an off leash dog or, unparented child running up to say hi to your dog?
Mm-hmm.
How would you feel if you didn't have to worry about your dog causing damage when that happened?
Yeah.
Because it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that a lot of clients to me have voiced, I don't have to worry anymore. And they're no longer scanning the environment in fear.
Mm-hmm.
They're still aware, but they're not worried that they're going to end up with a trip to the ER.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting because I'm for those of you that are listening that are in like a big city versus
Mm-hmm.
a lot, like we're really fortunate in Colorado, or at least like the certain areas that I see clients or where my clients live. Management always fails, right? And there could be an off-leash dog anywhere, but we have so much space here in Colorado that we can really, there's certain areas that we can really get away versus I was on a call earlier with a few other trainers, and this woman was working with a client where the client lives right across the street from this massive park. It's got a dog park, and they have a reactive dog, right? And they've tried all the things, and like they cannot exit out the front door because not only is it stressful for the dog, but it's potentially dangerous, right? So not only is it that like, how will you feel, but it's also like, is the environment like, is it going to be too stressful for the dog and then stressful for you? And is it safe?
Yeah. Yep.
Whether you're wearing a muzzle or not, right?
Exactly. And I think reframing it to the client too, so that it's not a muzzle. It's more of like, hey, it's your party hat, or it's your treat basket,
Mm-hmm.
like
I love
you
that.
you can't go to the party unless you have your hat on,
Mm-hmm.
so that sort of thing. Like, we can't walk out the front door unless you have your muzzle on, but walking out the front door opens up so many more doors to these clients,
Totally.
because now they can get to the car, or to the park where the dog can actually sniff and decompress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. Well, where can folks find your awesome muzzles online?
Okay, so you can find my muzzles at www.trust-your-dog.com.
Awesome.
You can also find me on social media, on Facebook and Instagram. And I think that's about it. Yeah, I'm Trust Your Dog on Instagram and Trust YDM on Facebook.
Awesome. We'll link to all of that in our show notes so folks can check out your awesome stuff. But thank you for being a muzzle advocate, bite prevention advocate, and also doing it in a cooperative care fashion as well, and being an advocate for the dog having choice and all of these amazing, important topics. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course.